Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad that you all are with us for this two-part series, Bringing Life to Death. I'm Patty Ames, the Canon for Christian Formation, and hosting this evening. It is our pleasure to have two very gifted presenters with us for this series. The first of which is the Reverend Marisa Sifontes, who is the Associate Rector at St. John's in Roanoke. She is also the Diocesan Missioner for Becoming Beloved Community. Marisa and I were talking over the summer about the topic of death. And unbeknownst to me, Marisa was a death doula. And this was fascinating to me and very helpful for me as I was walking through some issues. And as she and I began talking, we decided to do this series along with her friend that I will let her introduce, Shelby Kirillin. And Marisa, thank you both, you and Shelby, for being with us this evening.
Thanks so much for bringing this topic to life, Patty. We really do appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to so many in the diocese about this topic. I'm going to start with a prayer, and then I will talk a little bit about my own journey, why I'm here, and introduce Shelby, who's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting tonight because she is truly an expert in this field of end of life. Let us pray. Creator God, you've given each of us a life to live. We pray that every day we remember to honor that gift. Redeemer God, your example reminds us that our spirits are meant to return to you. So while we are here, help us to remember how we may move forward, knowing these bodies and these lives are so very impermanent. Sustainer God, we ask you to provide us with fuel for the journey, strength for the conversations we need to have, and open hearts and minds to address the inevitable part of all of our lives, our deaths. All this in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So, how do we get from a conversation this summer to chatting about death over the course of 2 weeks? I can tell you how I got here, and I will let Shelby tell you how she got here. My journey starts with the death of my husband about 10 years ago after about a 2-year illness. And what I learned from that experience is that there's no real way that our society prepares us for the end of one's life. We don't talk about it. We've removed ourselves from what is and has always been, for most of our history, a very societal process. Nowadays, it's kind of been bifurcated. And so there's life, and then there's what comes after, or what happens when you're no longer alive. And so the end-of-life doula movement started as a way to address the need to have these conversations and to help shepherd people through the end of their lives. And when I learned about the end-of-life movement, I was super interested because I felt like I could have been better prepared when I was facing the death of my own husband. And so in 2016, I went to a class to learn about what this thing was. And I was super, super thankful to get to meet Shelby Kirillin, who has had her own journey through this process as well. I'm going to turn it over to her in just a minute, but I want to share with you a slide because I want this to help frame our conversation as we chat. Patty, do you have that? Thanks. So this came up just this past week on a Instagram feed for the Decolonizing Christian. If you don't follow them, I highly recommend it. And given we've just recently passed All Saints Day and All Souls Day in our own calendar, this gave some good food for thought. And it reads, Christianity cannot be good news to our world if it's disembodied. If there's no space for death or dying, wilderness or doubt in Christianity, then how will there ever be healing or newness of life? Without death, there's no life. Science has demonstrated this to be true. It's a good framing for our conversation for the next 2 weeks, trying to think about where the space is for dying in our lives, but also in our faiths. And so with that, I'm going to let Shelby introduce herself and start walking through kind of what we have for you for tonight. Shelby?
Thank you so much, Marisa. Thank you, Patty. Thank you all for coming and joining us. So my name is Shelby Kirillin. I am an end-of-life doula. Some people call me a death doula. I have also been called, a death coach. I go by many, many names. And so how I arrived where I am, and I appreciate your prayer tonight when we were thinking about calling or gifts. I've spoken at other churches, and it's weird to say like my calling is death. My calling is supporting the dying. But what I have come to realize is that really is what my calling is. So I am a nurse. I've been a nurse for almost 24 years, and only in the ICU has been my experience. And in those experiences, I've been with lots of people who are dying. And what I came to recognize is that death is very sad and sorrowful. And it should be, because it's the opposite coin of love, right? And we tend to grieve as deeply as we loved. But there is an added pain and anxiety that our culture puts on this process. And what I found as a nurse, and then I started reading voraciously just about death and dying and grief, is, what we don't talk about, we fear. What we don't understand, we fear. And what happens is when a diagnosis comes, we quickly build this fragile bubble of hope around us, hope for a false positive or a new study or a new drug or a cure. And we insulate ourselves in this truly, truly fragile bubble. And what happens is when it pops, it causes this spiral of pain and anxiety that is where I can help solve for. That is where I can show up, and that is where I can support. The opposite of life is not death, which surprises a lot of people. The opposite of death is birth, and it's under this umbrella of life. So when we talk about death, we're talking about life. We're just talking about the last couple chapters versus the first couple chapters. And I have also experienced, we labor into life and we labor out of life. Death or end of life is not a moment. But when you look at our culture and all of the things around the birthing process, the classes and the doctor's appointments and the entire sections at bookstores and celebrations, ceremonies, rituals, and then look like what we do around the dying process. And those things those are bookends of our life. And they're supposed to balance each other. And if we look at what we don't do or how we do treat end of life, we deny it, we ignore it, we don't talk about it. So no wonder the side effect of that is we're getting these outcomes, people who are not prepared. It comes out of nowhere. And when I say not prepared, not just physically with documents, which is one thing, but also emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. And that right there is where end-of-life doulas support. So that is a very long-winded explanation, Marisa, of what I am and how I came to do that. So do you want me to hit the agenda real quick, Marisa, or did you want to take over?
Yeah, Shelby, your sound changed right in there, and I want to make sure everybody can hear what you have to say. So
I turned my little AirPods better. Is that better?
It's not. It's still the same. It sounds like you're probably not coming through your AirPods anymore.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just change my audio then. I can just do this. Okay. Is that any better?
Same.
Oh, well, I've tried both of mine. It said sound keeps changing. Maybe let's fool with it. I'll fool with it and you.
So we've got these 2 weeks. And so this week, we're going to talk a lot about the practicalities of dying, about some of the things that you can do to get your affairs in order, whatever that means, which means an awful lot. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what the funeral planning process looks like in your church. And we're going to talk about some of the specifics of how things happen. And then next week, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the end of life and what it looks like and what we can do to help make it a more comfortable place. As Shelby said, death is sad. There is loss. There is grief that comes with it. There's a lot of unknown. But there are things that we can do to prepare and get ready for this process. And so next week, we're going to talk a lot about that. So Shelby, how's your sound?
All right. And can you tell any difference here?
It's not, but you're speaking loud enough. So I think we may be okay. So why don't you go ahead and jump in and start talking about how we get our affairs in order, what that means.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I'm not going to do this the whole time, but I like to give us a little visual. Let's see, here we go. Okay, bringing life to death, a beginner's guide to end of life. So I don't want tonight to be, to cause stress at all. These are things we're just talking about. And to be honest, this is the first step. This is the invitation to talk about it. The first thing that comes up for me is an advanced directive. And so what an advanced directive is, it's telling your loved ones, when you can no longer speak for yourself, what do you want done? What is important to you? So when advanced directive come into play, you're still alive, but you cannot express what you want. So the advanced directive, you do not need a lawyer. There are resources online, and I will actually put some in the chat. And there are some that are better than others. If you just go to the state of Virginia advanced directive, in my opinion, in my nursing opinion, and in my end of life doula opinion, it's not a great form. It is, and I'll stop sharing now because I really do like to see everyone's faces. That form tends to be quite ambiguous. And as somebody at the bedside who has treated people at the bedside in my nursing role, not the most helpful. The two I like, honoring choices, and like I said, I'll pop this into the chat. They make a whole book and it really walks you through. And also, I also like 5 wishes. Both of these are really good booklets that you can sit down with your loved ones and talk about what is important to you. I'm going to give you some examples. My background is primarily in neuro, so we're talking about strokes, spinal cord issues. And when it's black and white, it's not really a hard decision. When there's nothing that can be done, that's not a hard decision. The hard decision is you have had a massive stroke. You're going to survive, but you will never be able to talk, and you will never be able to understand language anymore, and you will never be able to recognize people anymore. You are dependent on a ventilator and you're dependent on a feeding tube, but you will survive. Is that quality of living to you? And there is no right or wrong answer. There are people who said, if my heart is beating, that is fine. If that just means that every 2 hours, someone's going to come and turn me and I'm going to have to live in a nursing home because a ventilator, you need round the clock care. And if that's living to you, that's wonderful. If you say that's not living to me, I love to be, I had one person, I love to garden. I love to be outside. I love people. I love my family. I want to interact with my family. And if I can't do that, then that's quality of living to me. So this is what Advanced Directive does. It really gets you starting to talk on what is the purpose of my life. Decades ago, it used to be whatever the medical team really dictated what was going to happen. They would tell we are going to do this. And then the pendulum swung to where the medical community, and I have sat in these discussions, they'll say your loved one has had a massive bleed on their brain. We can take them to surgery to remove it. We can wait and to see if it's absorbed, or we can kind of just drain it. What are you thinking? And the family members are like, I don't like either of those two pendulum choices. I like a middle pendulum choice. It is the responsibility of the patient and their loved ones to understand what that person's quality of living is. To say, you know what, they love outdoors, they love being active. And if this injury will not allow them to have that kind of life, that's the kind of life that they envisioned. And then let the medical team decide, okay, well, if that is quality of living, you know what, I don't think brain surgery, it's not going to equal that, right? So that's the medical team's decision, because they're the ones who have had years and years and years of schooling, but they don't know your loved one like you do. So filling out Advanced Directive, again, it doesn't have to be with a lawyer. And I always say it's an invitation to a conversation. I have seen Advanced Directive overturned. Very bluntly, I have had doctors say the living can sue and the dead cannot. So if you fill out an Advanced Directive and said, I do not want to be on a ventilator, I do not want to have a feeding tube, and you sign it, if your loved ones come in and say, no, you're going to put them on a ventilator and they are going to have a feeding tube, if they say it loud enough, the medical team will do that. So that's why it's so important, more than anything else, to have that conversation with your loved ones. Do you want to be on a ventilator, or do you not want to be on a ventilator? When you do that, it is allowing your family members to not have guilt for the rest of their life, because they're just being your voice. They're not making a decision. You have made the decision and they're just voicing your opinion. If you don't tell them, then they do have to make that decision. And for the rest of their life, and I have been in more meetings than I can count, the family members say, I don't know what they want, just do everything. Or I don't know, if we don't put them on a ventilator, they'll die, and then I killed my mom. So have these conversations. What is quality of living to you? That is what, I say we write all these chapters in our book of life, but for some reason, that last chapter, we are so quick to hand that pen over to our loved ones, to the medical team. You know what I want. Do what you think is right. And that's not okay. This is your book of life, and you end it the way you want it. So the Advanced Directive is really important. I'm just going to share my screen again to get back on that slide. So the power of attorney, you have a legal and a medical. It can be the same person. It can be two different people. And they don't have to be related to you. My stepfather is not my mother's medical power of attorney. I am, because she says she knows he will never let her go. And so I am. And so the medical power of attorney is the one that helps make the medical choices and decisions and advocates for what you want. And the legal person does all the legal stuff outside of medical. The other thing to talk about is a code status. All of us, to my knowledge, when you come into a hospital, all of us are full codes, which means we will do full CPR on you. We will, if your heart stops, we will shock your heart, we will do compressions, we will bring you back. And unfortunately, it's not only, we'll say, regular people that don't like to talk about this. Doctors don't like to talk about this. And I have sat with numerous people who have terminal diagnoses, cancer that's everywhere, ALS. They have diseases that are coming to the end of their lifespan, and they are still considered full codes. And unless you know to ask about it, or you have a great medical team that asks you about your code status, a lot of times this gets overlooked, or families don't know how to talk about it. And so I've sat with people who said, you know, if my heart were to stop, like, the good Lord is calling me. The cancer's everywhere. That's okay. Don't resuscitate me. Again, there's some people who want to be resuscitated at the very end. That's fine too. But it's important that you have these conversations. If you have a terminal diagnosis, you are a caregiver of someone with a terminal diagnosis or advanced age. My grandfather, who was in his 90s, did not want to be resuscitated. He said, when in my time, it's my time. I will be very honest, resuscitating someone is very violent. To compress the heart or the chest enough to make the heart beat, we crack most of your ribs. And if the reason your heart stops is because you have a disease process, the probability of you surviving that traumatic event is very, very low. And so sometimes I talk to people and I say, what do you think of when you think of your last day or days on this earth? How do you want to spend it? I have yet, in my 24 years of doing nursing and or end of life work, someone described to me, I want to be coded, strangers all around me, bright lights everywhere, sticking a breathing tube down my throat, lots of needles in my arm, and that's how I want to go. So it's important that you have these honest conversations with your family, your loved ones, your physicians, because they don't bring it up. Physicians don't bring it up a lot. And the last thing, just to touch on, I mentioned living trust, living will. That has to do with like your property. And so that is something you want to get a lawyer involved in. You can do it online, but you really don't want to. There is a lot of snafus that can happen in that document. You want to make sure it's well orchestrated. And that's something that does take a lawyer. So I want to make sure that people know that. So that's kind of.
So Shelby, if I can jump in for a minute and ask you
Please.
a question. One of the things that we talk a lot about with end of life issues is we think that they're limited to people who are older. And we don't have to really pay any attention or think about end of life issues until we get older. And so, but that's not really true, is it? Because end of life issues come up at any age. I have 2 boys who are in college right now. And one of the things that I learned this year and I'm dealing with them is that as soon as you hit 18, as a parent, they're an adult. They are legally not your responsibility any longer. And so putting a medical power of attorney in place for each of my kids allows me to ensure that we don't have a hiccup if something happens and they need medical care or they need medical decisions made that they're not able to make themselves. So these conversations about end-of-life issues and ones that prepare us for end-of-life issues are really all the time conversations for everybody. It's part of normalizing death as a natural process in our society, as opposed to what it is now, which is something very removed.
Yes, that's such a great point. Because you're right. Like I said, with all the advances in medicine, we still have 100% mortality. So it's going to happen. So why not doing what you're doing? Let's remove some of the stuff. So when it happens, you're not having to talk about medical power of attorney and what's going on. You can just really be focused on what's happening. I wrote my advance directives in my 20s. I have written my obituary. Yes, it is, you do this work. It's actually easier because it's a little bit removed if you don't have a terminal diagnosis or life-limiting illness to do it now. And you can always change it. You can always edit it, but it's there. My family knows what I want. So thank you. Great point. Great point.
Shelby, can I jump in? We have a question in the chat about the resource 5 wishes. And Matt has asked or learned, he thought that to complete it, you had to work with a licensed 5 wishes facilitator, someone that's trained in assisting with that. And he's wondering if that's true.
No, that's not true. You can sit here and you can work through it on your own. The only thing it will have to do to be valid in our state is 2 witnesses have to sign it. And it's recommended that it's not 2 people that would be your beneficiaries. So when I filled out mine, I got my neighbors to sign it. They are just signing that it was me who signed it. But yeah, anybody can do it. You don't need to get anybody specially trained. Thank you. That's a great question, though. All right. So the next kind of, and this is more of like to-dos of, I always call it administrivia, death administrivia. Where are your documents? Some people have them, but they're either all over the place, they can't remember, they're in a safe deposit box and no one knows where the key is. So it's important, and I know many people who get an accordion folder and put all of these in here, because when somebody is ill, especially if it's, honestly, even if it's a diagnosis, which seems forever, when that moment comes, when death is close, it feels like stress hits, everybody is kind of on guard. And so to be able to just pick up an entire accordion folder or a folder of some sort, online, digitally, or physical, makes life so much easier for your, I'll call them your person, whoever your medical POA is, because these are the things they need. Instead of rummaging through drawers, where are your documents? The co-signer for a bank account, is there a co-signer? If you're somebody who maybe your your adult children are going to be take over those types of accounts, are they a co-signer already? Imagine, because sometimes it can be very hard for the POA to get access. If you're still alive, you're just not able to communicate, but they need access into your banking account because they need to pay your bills. Sometimes that's a lot of red tape of proving that the PO, that you cannot speak for yourself. So the POA is in effect, so they can get to pay those bills. So sometimes it's so much easier if they're already co-signers They already have access. Do they know where, you know, some people have a 401k over here and an IRA over here, an investment here. Do they know, do you know all the places your money is? You know, what utilities do you pay? I went to a conference last week about kind of end of life estate planning, and it's really recommended if you could do auto pay. It's wonderful because that way people aren't, you know, your medical power of attorney or the legal power of attorney, they're not following on not paying your bills. So list out in this accordion folder, here are the utilities, here are their, you know, the name, the phone number, maybe the account number. So the person can just go right down. I never thought about this, but is there a list where all your doctors are kept? So the person, I had a family member, their mom passed away. They thought they were done with the estate, and like 6 months later, they got billed for $25 because their mom was a no-show at a doctor's appointment. Because they didn't know to call the doc. They didn't have all the numbers. So that's a good thing, is who are all the doctors, dentists, veterinarians. Depending on where you live, I am in Richmond and we have 26 hospices. And I tell people, when you have a diagnosis, it might not be time right now to enroll in hospice, but that you have a choice. If there are choices out there, find which one resonates with you, which ones, you know, do you have, you know, you can call and find out what is their response time for the nurse, the on-call. Find the one that you want to work with, because if you wait until you're really not feeling good and you're in pain, and then you reach out and call the one hospice that your doctor gave you, if you aren't big fans of them, you are not going to care. You're not going to want to shop around, and it could really change the experience that you have. And then the other part is your home. Are you a renter? Do you own? Is there a deed? Where is the rental agreement? Is there somebody else on the loan? What bank is the loan through? What do you want done with the house if you own it? So then we're going to get more into household stuff. A car. So this is something that, again, I learned so much of this just through my nursing, where a gentleman, he was the only one on, it was a married couple, and he had a massive stroke that was unsurvivable. And he was the only one on the ownership of the car. And it was going to take a while for the wife to get onto the car, to be registered as the owner for the car. And so what I didn't realize, and this is in Virginia, it's called beneficiary transaction request. It's through the DMV. And you can fill it out now. And all it says is, if something happens to you, it names the beneficiary that the car is going to go to. And it's already there. It can be on file. Because if the one person who owns that car, it's going to go into the estate. And then if you, depending on your will situation, could go through probate. And I think, if I remember correctly, the estate tax is $1 in Virginia, $1 for every $1,000 of an estate. So if your $25,000 car doesn't have a beneficiary, or no one else is co-signed, it's going to be added to your estate, and you're going to have to pay, they're going to pay taxes on that car. So it's important that you do that. Your belongings, do you want them sold? Are there special belongings that you want someone to get? Make sure that's known. I will say death brings out not so good sides of people. I've seen so much fighting. That was supposed to be my necklace. She told me I was supposed to have it. So tag it, write it down, or type it in an Excel spreadsheet. Special things that are supposed to go to different specific people. The rest, do you want it donated? Do you want it sold and the money go to a special church or foundation or organization that you want to support. Because a lot of people keep their loved ones, things around them because they don't know what to do. They don't know what they wanted to have done with them. So it's so much easier if the person says, I want, these things to go to so-and-so, and the rest, I want you to sell, and all the money go to church. They have their marching orders. They don't have to think. Nowadays, a lot of people are doing things on computers, online. Where are your passwords? The passwords even to get into your computer, because saying the passwords are in my computer, if no one doesn't know how to get into your computer, that is not much of help. So where are your passwords? Where are they stored? And for people that are on social media, what do you want done with social media? Is it okay that I have one wonderful friend who was my first client 6 years ago, and her Facebook page is still up because people still can write on it. They can write tributes to her, or you'll still say, oh, it's Sherry's birthday today. And so people once a year will go to her page and and her daughters will write on there. So it's still a page that's up and running. Or is that not something you want? Do you want people to post your obituary on social media? Do people know how to get on your social media? If you have I can only speak from an iPhone. I do not have an Android. If you go into your settings, you can make an emergency contact person. And you can also do this at least on Facebook, that if something happens to you, it automatically gives them access to close your account. And then I'm going to hand it over to Marisa for our funeral talk. Please stop sharing.
Thanks, Shelby. Actually, before we do that, I'm hoping that we can spend a couple minutes just talking about hospice a little bit, because you mentioned hospice, and hospice is something that is frequently called in at end of life, and it can be a little bit confusing, right? Because you've got hospice and you've got palliative care. What's going on there? What are those two things, and how can they help us as we are approaching the end of our lives?
Great question. So palliative care, even though it's been around for over a decade, I feel like it's just getting some love now. So palliative care, the medical professionals who are palliative care physicians, their focus is on symptom management and quality of life. So they can be end of life, but they don't have to be. There's actually a study in the medical journal, the Journal of Medicine, where they followed, and it was like 1,000 people, men with prostate cancer, half of whom at the time of diagnosis went with an oncologist and a palliative care physician. And then the control group just had an oncologist, and the people who had the palliative care physician with oncologist actually lived longer, because a palliative care physician, they focus on symptom management. How are you feeling? What is quality of life? If you are, let's just go along the cancer route. If you're taking chemotherapy and really not tolerating it well and having lots of symptoms, a palliative care physician can help manage those symptoms. Unfortunately, you have to be your own advocate. You can ask, some oncologists specifically they like to be like, I'm a palliative care physician too. You want a palliative care physician who's done a fellowship in palliative care. They are wonderful and worth their weight in gold. Hospice is end of life care, but it's quality of life. To be able to sign into hospice, one of the things is you have in a trajectory, a likelihood, or I should say a possibility of death within 6 months. There are people who have been on hospice for years. Every 6 months, they will look at you, and is the trajectory still possible that in 6 months you will be dead? And if the answer is yes, then you can stay in hospice. But what hospice benefits gives you, and it's covered by Medicare, is aides to come and help. They focus on quality of life. So pain, discomfort, People, another research is people who are able to get into hospice early actually lived longer. I attribute it to, they have a reason to wake up in the morning. When you open your eyes in the morning and feel miserable and do that day in and day out, it's very quickly to not really have a purpose to wake up the next day. But if you can manage those symptoms and have a reason to get up, have a reason to go out and see your garden, have a reason to go and talk to your loved ones, that can actually extend living. Because I often tell people, I am all for extending living, but I'm not for extending dying. I don't know many people that will say, can you please really let me die as long as it, like, let's like make that days and days and days. That's not what they focus on. They focus on living. And so it's important to know, some people unfortunately say hospice is, oh, you've thrown in the towel, you're giving up. Hospice is quality of life care.
So I'm confused, Shelby, if I can just, play the other side for a minute, because
Yes.
hospice usually means you are dying. That is, I think the statistic is that the vast majority of people who call in hospice die within a couple days of calling in hospice. Now, I know that's missed opportunity for quality of life, and you know that, but can you talk a little bit about that then? Because I think people get worried about hospice, and I see in chat we have some hospice professionals in here, and I'm thrilled for that. But can you talk about what that looks like a little bit, and why perhaps we should not have the fear of hospice that we do?
I think, the reason why, the mean time, it's less than a week that when people enroll in hospice is because our culture is so terrified that they wait till the very last minute to call hospice in. If hospice is brought in early, people have better experiences and better quality of life than people who try to suffer on their own, because that H word, once I bring that H word in, it means I'm dying and this is happening. Whether you bring hospice in or not, you are dying. You're just choosing whether you want support and whether you want your loved ones to have support or whether you don't want support. That hospice has chaplains and social workers and nurses who are trained in end of life, who are trained to support your loved ones. There are so many benefits to enrolling. I think it really goes to why we're all here is what we don't talk about, we fear. And so people fear death, and hospice is related to death. So I'm going to fear hospice.
Yeah, so Shelby talked about the fact that you need to have the decision is that you have a possibility of dying within 6 months. And also, I believe that you can't be in active treatment for whatever disease or process it is that is causing you to be a candidate for hospice. That doesn't mean that you can't be treated for other things. So if you have cancer and also diabetes, you can still see your endocrinologist or take your diabetes medication. You cannot be an active cancer treatment that is designed to prolong your life. So those are the qualifications for hospice. But on the flip side, once you come into the hospice process, as Shelby said, there is a lot of assistance and support for your family. There may be counseling for your family, for children in your family, for your spouse, for you, to help talk through end-of-life issues. There may be social work to help you live through that end of your life. My husband, my family, and I, we called in hospice a couple months before he passed away, once it was clear that his cancer treatment was no longer working. And we went on a cruise. We got to spend that time with our boys and make family memories and focus on some of those things that we would not have had the quality of life for my husband to be able to live through had we not made that transition early. There were people who came and helped with specific things, or sat with my husband and read to him, different things like that. And each hospice is different in the services that it offers. You can do hospice at home, you can do hospice in a hospice center, depending on what the hospice near you offers. But they are resources that are best explored early on. So you can make a decision of how hospice plays into how you want to design your end of life.
And real quick before, because I don't want to cut too much into your time on funeral and burial. Another thing that you made me think of is, if you're enrolled in hospice, or your loved one's enrolled in hospice, and something happens, let's say they choke and go unconscious, they fall in the middle of the night, you get scared and you don't know what to do, you call hospice. They will send people out there, they will help you. I'm thinking about if you're in a home setting, which so many people want to be in their home, and they can support that process. If you are not, and something like that scary stuff happens, they choke, they fall, and you call 911, they will come a guns a-blazing with their sirens, with everything. If their heart is to stop, they're going to do compressions. They're going to take your loved one out of the home and whisk them to the ER. And there's been a couple of people who have died in the hallways on a stretcher in the ER. And that's not what the person wanted. That's not what the family wanted, but they got so upset, they didn't know what to do. So being in hospice gives another person, another individual to call to support you through that process.
Thanks. And I saw a note go by in chat that the same is true for extended care, long-term care issues as well. And it's interesting, so much of what we're talking about tonight is about communication. It's really about having the discussions while you're able to, so that you and your loved ones are able to make decisions about what you want and what you want things to be like as we transition from this life to the next. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about what things look like from the church perspective. And these are practicalities. We're not going to talk about the spiritual stuff so much tonight, although I know that your clergy person stands ready to have those conversations with you. But as we've talked about getting your affairs in order, you can also be very specific about what you want your funeral to look like, what support you want from your clergy, from your church family at the end of your life. If you haven't looked at it, our prayer book contains beautiful, beautiful rites, both for ministration to the sick, ministration at the time of death, and burial rites. And these are sacramental rites in our church that are offered just like baptism and the Eucharist and marriage as part of our lives as the body of Christ. And it's both for us, and it's also for the community that we are a part of, that we prepare and we can spend time on these things. So if you haven't taken a look at page 453 in the prayer book and beyond it, I encourage you to read through so that you have some familiarity with it. Now, every church has, well, not every church, but many churches have funeral planning guides. If yours does not, I've got one from the Episcopal Church Foundation that I think Patty can drop that link in chat, that goes through and talks about the types of things that you're going to want to think about as you are considering what you want as a funeral plan. But contact your church first to see if they have a form and a guide that they will that they typically use. So you want to know who the contact person is, who either your power of attorney or the person who you want handling and planning things and ensuring that your wishes are fulfilled. If you've gone ahead and done pre-planning of your funeral with your clergy person, then it'll be on file and all your family has to do is contact the church, and they'll be able to pull out and know what it is that you've already arranged for. We're going to want to know which funeral home you pick, and that's a decision that either your family will make or you've made ahead of time if you've prepared those arrangements ahead of time. You want to make sure that in addition to your family contacting the funeral home, that they contact the church as well. Your clergy person wants to know. In fact, I would say that your clergy person wants to know anytime you're facing a significant illness that may end in death, so that we can walk with you in those final stages of your life, and help your family walk in the stages after. Your church may have a cemetery or a columbarium, and if not, we need to figure out where your ashes or your remains will be buried. Those are things that the church should know. And then once we get into the planning of the burial of the dead service, do you want to write one service or write two service? What type of readings do you want from the Old Testament, from the Gospel, from the New Testament? What are those readings? What are hymns that are meaningful to you? What are readings or poems that might be meaningful? And this is why communication and conversation are so important in this process, that as we talk about these things, we start to normalize what all the different pieces and parts, so that we can work through them together as a community. So the form that I hope Patty has stuck in chat has some of the just highlights. Other churches have other forms that you absolutely should figure out what yours says, so you do the right thing. But if you don't have one, if you're part of a church that doesn't have an active clergy person all the time, then looking at the form that we've stuck in chat should provide you with some ideas for you to think through what it is that you want, what would be helpful, what questions do you have that you want to sit down and talk with somebody about, so that you know what that looks like. I will tell you, the more you talk about this with those you love, the easier it becomes, both for you and for them. Normalizing end of life is an important part of life. I can tell you the story of my dad, who's 88 right now, and every time I see him, he reminds me of the conversation that he probably started having with me when I was about 8 years old. And that was, I want to be cremated. Just so you know, I want to be cremated when I die. And I don't want to end up in a box. That's not what I want. And over time, those conversations have grown to include what types of medical interventions he wants and doesn't want, and things like that. But it started very early, and I don't know why that was important to him. Nowadays, he tells me that if I put him in a box, he's coming back to haunt me. So take that for what you will. But the more we talk about those things, it's known that my dad is going to be cremated, that's what he wants. Everybody in the family knows it. So there won't be any last minute audibles called, because he's made his wishes well known. We're coming up on end of time. So Shelby, do you want to preview what we're going to cover in week 2?
Sure. So a lot of what we've talked about tonight is administrivia, things to complete, tie up, as Marisa was saying, communicate with your loved ones. And that's important as far as the preparation, the paperwork goes to end of life. But end of life is a lot more than that. And so how do we prepare ourselves? How do we prepare ourselves to come to our last days? How do we want to, I mentioned, what do those last pages sound like? How are we going to end them in a period or an exclamation point? You have say over that. Many people don't think you do. So you can write things like vigil plans. How are you going to be remembered? When your physical being is no longer here, what will be here for your loved ones to remember you, for them to, when they miss you so deeply, to look at, read, be part of, to remind them that you're still there with them, just in another form. So it's going a little deeper into the dying process of, how do I prepare for my last days? And what do I want them to look like?
So that's the preview to hopefully interest you in coming back for week 2, because we really will dig into that process in a very real way that we don't typically in society. We're going to have you thinking about it. We're going to have you making some preliminary decisions, not that those are the ones that stick, but really giving yourself a chance to vision and think about what it is that you want at your end of life. I always think of the example of as somebody is dying, do you want to smell hospital smells? Do you want to smell chocolate chip cookies, right? What are the things that you think will help? What would a peaceful passing look like for you? So we're going to talk about that next week. We've got just a couple minutes. Want to make space for questions. We've been talking an awful lot. If you've got a question, please feel free to put it in chat. And we'll try to take 1 or 2 of those before we close for this evening. And I hope you're able to see the chat, that there's a lot of good stuff going on in there. There's a question.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat and I will share that with Marisa and Shelby.
There's a request that we include a component about how we can help others during their last days, coaching, supporting, and interventions.
And there's a question that's come in the chat. Can hospice get involved if you're still in the hospital?
Normally that's when hospice, they can connect with you and your loved ones. And then, so the hospital, this is going to get in the nuts and bolts of, they can only charge insurances for curative interventions. So once it has been reached, and not necessarily they're going to like cure your cancer, but if you're in because you have intractable pain, that they can bill for because they're working towards getting you pain free. Once there's no interventions for the hospital, hospice will come in and then discuss with you what is the best, do you want to be in a facility? Do you want to be at home? And that's where they can orchestrate the transition from hospital to institution or to home.
A lot of hospitals have affiliated hospice units, and so that's something that you might get referred to. But again, it's important to talk to the different hospices in the area and figure out which one is going to provide the type of services and the type of end-of-life experience that works best for you and your family, provides the support that they need.
While we're waiting for more questions, going to Marisa, your dad, there's actually a designation of person to make arrangements for burial and cremation. A lot of people don't, your medical POA, once you die, it is no longer good. So if you are worried that your loved ones are going to do something that you don't want to your body, you can fill this out and you can designate somebody to make that decision for you. Some people have a chosen family over a birth family. And so once you're deceased, a lot of times whoever is going to pay for it, they want to call the shots. But if that's not the person you want to call the shots, you can actually fill out a form at the funeral home to make sure that you designate someone that's going to make your choices known.
So I see a question in the chat about right to die and Colorado. Virginia is not a right to die state. And so that does go beyond what we will be covering in these next 2 weeks, although super important issues and something to consider if you are in a right to die state. So it would be best, Marcia, for you to seek guidance from someone in Colorado.
Actually, I will put in the chat, there's a couple of people, medical aid in dying resources that you can look at. So I will put that for everybody, but.
And we will take the resources shared by our presenters as well as things noted in the chat, put all those together and send those out, sharing those in an email with you all.
We are right at 8 o'clock, so I'm going to say thank you to Shelby for speaking on this so eloquently this evening, and to Patty for setting this up, and to all of you for listening in. We hope to see you next Monday so we can continue this conversation and dig into some more of the our issues around end of life and how we help to prepare for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.